Hi, I'm Steve Walsh, the military and veterans reporter for KPBS. On behalf of KPBS, our festival organizers, volunteers, and filmmakers, thank you for joining us for our afternoon of short documentaries. With this afternoon, there are a number of talented directors, producers, and experts behind the films that we just watched. We have with us Tom St-John-Gray, who is the director of Forgotten Heroes, Dr. Ernest Koh, who is a historian who consulted on Forgotten Heroes. We have Tracie Hunter, who is the director of Brothers in Arms. We have Elizabeth Suter, who is the producer of Brothers in Arms. We have Brian Graves, who is the director of Charlotte Mansfield, A Woman Photographer Goes to War. Thanks you all for being here. So I want to start with the film Charlotte Mansfield Goes to War. I want to know a little bit more about Charlotte Mansfield. Did anyone really get a chance to talk to her in person while she was still alive?
No, we interviewed her partner Lorraine Caddy, and that's about the closest we got. We also had some home movies that featured her, and then we were able to get her memoirs of her time during World War II. So that way we're able to get a first-person voice in the film. But other than that, no, we unfortunately never had the opportunity to talk to her.
Did she get any recognition at all? Obviously, someone was able to collect all those photographs, put them all in one place, and you had enough information to do her story. But did she understand the significance of her story while she was still alive?
She was very, I think she was always conscious of, documenting her experiences. During the war, she took lots of photographs, and she wrote her memoirs, of course. And I think she knew it was significant. She got a lot of recognition during her lifetime for her photography, but I think she certainly deserves more. And
how'd you end up picking her story?
Well, a friend of mine at the World War II Institute at Florida State University told me that he was interested in doing some documentary films on their collections, and asked me to come over to the archives and take a look at what they had. And Charlotte's scrapbooks immediately jumped out at me as something extraordinary, and her photographs are really unlike any photographs of World War II women that I'd ever seen before. So I think before working on this project, the first image of women during the war that would come to my mind was women laborers on the home front, Rosie the Riveter. And doing this project was a real eye-opener for me in terms of learning about the Women's Army Corps and all of the jobs that women did in the military, including Charlotte's. And she had a great eye, and she captured women's experiences in Europe during World War II.
Yeah, there seem to be very few pictures that I've seen of women taking center stage during World War II. It always seems like they're in the background. They're doing some filing somewhere while something else is going on. So this really was a rare opportunity to really take a look at this otherwise forgotten aspect of World War II.
Yeah, and I think her photos too really sort of capture how women were navigating their new roles in the military, and expanding their opportunities beyond what their job descriptions were at the time. So in her case, for example, taking photographs and doing things that weren't really expected of her in her job role, but that were important nonetheless, and that sort of expanded her professional opportunities in photography. So yeah, she would always, later in life, she'd mentor people in photography, and she would tell them, you have to do something other than what's expected of you. And I think that really encapsulates her story, and women in the military more broadly who've achieved successes that go beyond the expectations or the roles that had been laid out for them by the military.
Well, I want to get back to that, but let me bring in the folks behind Brothers in Arms. Charlie Kohler, Marine. Where did the two of you find find your main subject for this? Because obviously he took to the camera pretty quickly.
Yes. So Charlie, actually, his son had been looking for somebody to tell his story. And one of the big parts of Charlie's story, as you watch, is him and his search to find the last surviving member of his regiment to honor the men that didn't come home. So his son was looking for, anyone who could help get this story out, and had seen another World War II project that we had done and reached out to us, and we immediately fell in love with Charlie. And he had such a unique story with his brother and their service together. So we said, absolutely, let's do this. And just immediately, took to him. So he's been such a dear friend in our lives, and has a remarkable story and memory at 99 years old.
He's 99 years old.
He is, and he's just shy of his 100th birthday in August. So we're looking forward to that.
So how hard is it to work with somebody who is getting up there, upwards of 100 years old? I've had some experience interviewing World War II vets, and it can take a while to really sort of get them to lay out their story. I mean, well worth it, but not an easy assignment.
It is. One of the difficulties that we find is our biggest struggle can be time. There's, at this point, with Charlie's story at the time, 75 years in between the events and his retelling of it. But through the family's help, through photographic, documents, and Charlie thankfully did have a very good memory. He was able to tell his story very eloquently, but that is one of the challenges. And also patience as filmmakers. These people are 99 up, so we have to, take our time with them and be mindful to not bring too much pain to them as we're going through some of the harder parts of their stories. So we really do try to take a careful approach, but Charlie just did a fantastic job.
Yeah, Elizabeth, you had to be in the room while you're interviewing someone who's talking about losing their brother in the middle of World War II, somebody who didn't want him to join, and then he didn't want his brother to take on the dangerous assignment in Iwo Jima.
Yeah.
You must have known as that's coming up that this is going to be a really difficult story to tell. How'd you approach it?
It was, I was also, in addition to being the producer, I was able to be the videographer. And so I feel like sometimes that camera in front of you kind of protects you from being so in the moment. And Tracie was the interviewer for that interview. And so she's right in front of him and, seeing all of the emotion come through. And so it is a very difficult thing to sometimes process, but unfortunately, because I'm dealing with the technical stuff, sometimes that happens afterwards. Later on, I'm thinking about it and going through it in my head. And it is just an incredible story of even as Charlie was injured and he was on the ship, his brother was on that ship with him, but he didn't know. And so it's just a heartbreaking moment for the two of them. And, even in the interview, of course, it's his brother and he still gets emotional, and talking about that is just so heart-wrenching for him. But the legacy that he's leaving by telling that story so that all the generations can really benefit from knowing what those moments in war are like, is just a monumental feat. So we're thankful for him for being able to tell his story.
Do you feel you're really under the gun at this point? We have a couple of different
Yes.
from World War II here, and the eyewitnesses are growing fewer and farther between.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Tracie and I have literally chased World War II veterans down in parking lots just with a sense of urgency of being able to document their stories. And just, if you're willing to tell the story, we want to be able to tell it. And to date, we've filmed over 25 veteran stories. And unfortunately, we've only been able to produce 5 of those stories, 5 of those episodes. And so our mission is to document them as eloquently as possible and in a very beautiful way, but also trying to get them done as quickly as possible. We spend our weekends running out and getting these stories and getting these interviews. So at least we have them and they're ready to be produced. So yeah.
Do they get better with age? Some of these
Yes.
shows get better with age, even when you're talking to somebody who's in their 90s?
Absolutely. It's phenomenal to me every single time we sit down with these guys. And, you know, some of these interviews, you know, we're filming 7-hour interviews, but the detail that they go into and the detail that they remember is astonishing to me. But beyond that, you know, we're forming relationships with these heroes, and it's amazing that when they sit down and they tell these stories, they reveal things to even their family that they didn't know, and it grows those relationships closer. So people feel like, you know, they know their fathers even better, they know their grandfathers even better after we're able to sit down and interview with them. So it's a wonderful experience all around.
Excellent. So I want to move on here, and I want to try to get forgotten heroes into the conversation here. And before I even go, it looks like we've got somebody in the comments section. We have I'm gonna mess this up, I know, but Kim Tan Bap, who asked the filmmakers behind Forgotten Heroes. I'm Tan K Hai's granddaughter. Thank you for your gift. My grandfather was always reluctant to share anything about his war service. Dr. Koh, where and when did you first hear of my grandfather's story? And Mr. Sinjin Gray, what led you to producing this beautiful film? Well, frankly, she's just asked two of the best questions here. So Dr. Koh, let's start with you.
Right, well, I was actually writing a very different book. I was writing my dissertation on an economic history of Singapore, and I was digging through newspaper articles in the immediate post-war period. And then I came across a really, really short news report catching the island's population up. The island had been occupied by the Japanese army during the war, catching the island up on what was going on or what had happened during the years of occupation. And it was about the story of this pilot, Tan Kee Hai. And I'd never heard of it before. And, you know, despite being a very passionate history student in secondary school and learning all about the war, it was always something that happened to other people. Singapore's experience of the war has always been, you know, just being occupied, and that was the end of the story. So that piqued my interest. I still had to finish my dissertation, but the minute I got that done, I switched over to my next book, which is sort of really about stories like Tan Kee Hai's story.
Actually, you know, in America, people who were in World War II, that generation is called the greatest generation. These stories really are quite revered. I think we know a fair amount about the history in America. It's seen as a pivot point. It's often seen as some place maybe where we would need to get back to as a country, but it's a very well documented, well-known part of history. What about these vets in Singapore? Are they seen as the greatest generation?
No, I mean, well, they're seen, but I guess it happens in two layers, as with all war commemoration. Within the families, they are revered, but their stories are told and kept alive in households, among friends, and so on. But at the national level, because so much of that history is in service of post-colonial nation building, things that happened before the existence of the country tend to fall by the wayside. And that's precisely what happened to the story of Tan Kee Hai and the story of the other veterans who, you know, Tom covered so wonderfully in the documentary, simply because they didn't fit the sort of very carefully crafted post-colonial story that needed to be created after the war. So the answer is yes and no. They are revered at home, but outside of it, you know, practically no one who's outside of the family will have heard of these stories.
Almost invisible. So Tom, what drew you to these stories, other than I'm hearing this and I'm going like a story that's completely untold and unknown? That's exactly where a documentary filmmaker wants to go. But what drew you to these stories?
Well, there were a couple of elements, and thanks so much to Kevin for the question as well. It's great to have a questioner from my granddaughter, Tan Kee Hai. I think what was interesting when I first came across Ernest's book, Afterward War, and so that was really the blueprint in some ways for our documentary, because Ernest wrote about the 4 heroes that we chronicle in the documentary. What really struck me was obviously they're 4 very heroic individuals, and really their stories, as Ernest said, they're kind of known within the family circle, or they're perhaps known a little bit beyond that. For example, Captain Ho Weng To, who's obviously still alive, he actually has published a book, but really he's 101 now, and he only published a book very, very recently. So really in the very, very latter part of his life, he's now being celebrated, which is kind of blew my mind that he was taking part in such a pivotal war, and he laid the foundations for things in Singapore to come and help be part of that nation building. But really no one really knew about him until the last few years. And I think what also really got me excited, I guess, was, it's strange, there's lots of other cultural references. So in the UK, we had a big argument that blew up about Sam Mendes' war film 1917, and there was a Sikh soldier who was depicted in the film, and a commentator in one of the news programs had said, why is this Sikh soldier here? Is this tokenism? Is this catering towards some new political shifts? And obviously that led to a big debate, and at that time there was a lot of debate about actually the role of Sikh soldiers and the importance of highlighting people who stories are not told for a variety of reasons. And certainly I'd been watching a lot of D-Day and Battle of Britain films, and predominantly, Michael Caine turns up. Rarely would you see, or you would never see, a Chinese figure from Singapore. And I thought that really drew me to these men who were obviously were in these incredible arenas of war, and their stories just hadn't been told. And that certainly does not, I'm not trying to throw light away from the other stories that have been told and continue to be told, but it's extremely important. And really, we just felt this is a wonderful opportunity to add to that story and be part of a growing body of work, which kind of, I guess, just helps broaden the conversation and understanding of the war, and help bring in people who perhaps at that time haven't been talked about. And that's what really got us excited about this documentary. So it's a wonderful opportunity for that.
So these stories are not well known in Singapore. They're just as forgotten in England.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, really, when I've spoken to lots of friends who are in the RAF, and I'm from a forces family, and they're really not known at all. And when you talk to when we talk to people in Singapore about this documentary, many people are shocked. Some people obviously are aware of them, and there have been some. Tankei High has been on some social media. There was some awareness of that, and I think the response was a lot of younger people were quite shocked. And so I think there are pockets of people who are aware, but definitely the general main audience aren't. And I think certainly, definitely in the UK as well, they just are not known at all. So in conversations we've had, they've just been, people have just been very surprised. And certainly, I think that's what we tried to show in the documentary. These veterans, they came from halfway across the world and came to a completely different arenas of war. And I think that kind of that feels unheard of to a lot of people. And obviously we know in the Second World War it involved a huge amount of people moving around the world. But I think when we drill down to sort of specific stories, and when we talk about heroes themselves, this was something that really came up, the unexpected nature of where they were and what they were doing.
Surprised, but was there any pushback?
I don't think there's not so much any pushback. I think people are really interested in kind of welcoming these stories. I think there's perhaps some surprise and kind of maybe questioning why they haven't been talked about before and what can help be done to rectify that. But not so much pushback in our situation.
I'll ask you the same question I asked other filmmakers that had to interview subjects that are upwards in their 90s here. You must have done a pretty good job, because the granddaughter is chiming in saying, thanking you for getting her grandfather to open up. So how do you do it? Well,
I guess Tracie was talking about one of the aspects is a problem was time. And another major problem we had was with the pandemic COVID, because we were at the beginning of last year, we really wanted to go, travel around Europe and go into these places and explore, get to Stalag 3 and explore all these places and film them physically there. And obviously, the pandemic shut down borders. And I was trapped in the UK, and Ernest was in Australia, and we wanted to film in Singapore and the States. So there's all these pockets of areas, and we were all separated from each other. So I think it involved a lot of kind of reaching out to family members and trying to convince them that we want to tell a story in a respectful way. And Captain Ho Weng To is obviously still alive, so I think he also felt this is a good opportunity to put his side of the story across. And I think it's just the privilege, as other interviews have said before, the privilege of being able to sit down and recount not just the stories of the veterans, but their children and their grandchildren, and just helping to put this all in context and add to this story was just so wonderful.
Yeah, just hats off to you. It's not an easy thing to do, especially when you're dealing with history that's half around the world. And I think my advice to anybody who wants to try this is just get in there and maybe sit down and talk to your relatives, and do it with your phone if you have to. And what would you say? Patience would be the biggest virtue here?
Yeah, patience and resilience, I think. It's just got to keep on going, as Leah Hansen said, one of the granddaughters of Tan Khe Hai. You've just got to keep on going. That became like a motto in this production. And it's almost like the spirit of these men from the Second World War. And obviously they're very stoical and they wouldn't want to be called heroes, but we really drew from that in this production, because lots of things went wrong during the pandemic. And it was just, keep on going and believing in this project. And most importantly, that these stories need to be told and need to be shared. And so we really have that sense of duty right now to tell those stories from the past and kind of respectfully put these people in a position they should have been, and men like them. And I felt like what really drove our rockets, pushed us forward.
Well, I think that's the perfect place to end this. So today is the last day of the GI Film Festival. Access to rent the film as video on demand continues to the middle of the next week. To secure the video on demand rentals on the festival website, you can go to gifilmfestivalsd.org. Thank you to everyone for making this virtual film festival possible, including the advisory committee members, the Film Consortium San Diego, our filmmakers, our festival supporters and partners who include the California Arts Council, Skidita Daniels Communications, National University, Task and Purpose, and the San Diego International Airport Arts Program. In an email reminder you got with this screening, there was a link for our attendees for a survey. It takes just a few minutes of your time. Your feedback will help us make the 2022 GI Film Festival San Diego an even better event. Thank you to everyone.